It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Dr. Yehuda Van Dijk. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Yerushalayim. And Yehuda, if you could relate about your family history and how, Baruch Hashem, you survived the Shoah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As said before, my name is Yehuda Van Dijk. I was born in 1939, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. My parents from both sides had deep roots in the Netherlands. We come from the Netherlands. The ancestor of my mother is a very interesting person. In 1199, a ship from Portugal anchored in Emden, a little port in the north of Germany, not far from the border of the Netherlands. And from this ship, some Portuguese or Spanish families and some bachelors went on wall, and they strolled in the town, and they asked the people there if they perhaps knew some Jew, and they showed them there was indeed. They showed them the way to a house of a Jew. There's all sorts of stories about it, and some stories that in that house there was an inscription, Shvita Hashem Nagdi Tamid, and I'm not sure that if that is true. Anyhow, they came to that house and to this gentleman. His name was Moshe Uri Halevi. He was a rabbi, and they asked him to speak with him privately. He agreed, and then they told him they were not mere Spanish people. They were Jews. That means they were Marranos, and you have to take into account it is more than 100 years after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1592, and also more than 100 years after the enforced baptization, Christianization of the Jews in Portugal. And they asked him that if he would be ready to guide them to return to Jewry and to the Jewish laws. He was a very wise man. He told them, look here, Germany already then is not a safe country for Jews. But I advise you, go to Holland, it's only half a day by ship, go to Amsterdam. The Dutch, who are Protestant, are leading a war of independence against the Catholic Spaniards. The Spanish ruled over the Netherlands, and they hate the Catholics and the Spaniards very strong. So I'm sure they will let you live as Jews without any disturbance. And so they did. He told them, I will come after you and I will guide you back to Judaism. And so it was. He was the first rabbi. He was not a Sephardi. He was an Ashkenazi from Germany, but he was the first rabbi of the so-called Portuguese, that means a Sephardic Jewish community from previous Marranos. So from the side of my mother were very deeply rooted in the Netherlands, and also the family of my father, they came from Germany to the Netherlands in the half of the 17th century. So like most Dutch Jews, they were deeply rooted in the Dutch language. They forgot already Yiddish or Spanish, the Dutch mentality, the Dutch history, the Dutch culture. They felt at home in the Netherlands. As a matter of fact, there were never, until the Second World War, there were never pogroms in Holland. There was some anti-Semitism, of course, but it was not so virulent and aggressive like in Germany or in Eastern Europe. And the most important thing, the Dutch were very liberal, and they didn't interfere whatsoever with the Jews. They let them lead their religious life as they wanted to do. They could build the synagogues, cemeteries, everything. Of course, everything changed for the wars in the beginning of 1940. My father was a public servant. He worked in the municipality of Rotterdam. He was born also there. His father was a detective in the police force of Rotterdam, a very unusual profession for a Jew already then, but it illustrates the integration of the Dutch Jews in the general society. By the way, for instance, the president of the Supreme Court in Holland was a Jew, and nobody saw in this something extraordinary. Nearly all the professions were open for Jews, and his father passed away when he was still a young boy, and his mother had to live from a very small pension, and he and also his two elder brothers, when they were 16, 17, they started to work at the municipality. My father worked at the Department of Education. Later on, we'll see why this is important. By the way, if you want to ask something in the middle, that's okay. He came from a religious background, but not only that, but what was not unusual, but was not quite common. Also, when he grew up, he remained religious, and even under the influence of the chief rabbi of Rotterdam, Rav Davids, Aaron Davids, Hashem Yimkom et Damo, Zichrono Livracha, and the Rabbi Forst, who became after the war the chief rabbi of Rotterdam. He became stronger in his belief, in his traditional way of Jewish living. Not only that, he was also a Zionist, something what in Holland then was quite uncommon. How did he come to do Zionism? As a youngster of 16, he volunteered to see the Jews who fled from Poland and Russia in the 20s, the beginning of the 20s of the former century. They fled from the pogroms in Poland and the civil war in Russia, and they came to Rotterdam. Rotterdam was a very big port until today, and from Rotterdam by ship they went to the United States. And he at the station, he waited for them, gave them something to drink, something to eat, guided them where they could find cheap hotels. And then the first time he met what he called authentic Jews. Jews with long beards, with pious, with long black coats, with boots and a black cap on their head. And the Dutch Jews were quite assimilated in Holland. There was not, you could not find anybody like this. And then he was confronted with what was called the Jewish problem. And a short time afterwards, he joined the Zionist youth movement in Rotterdam, and he was very, very active in that movement. And later, when he was going to grow up, he in the Zionist movement. My mother came from totally other background. Her grandfather, my grand-grandfather, was one of the most respected Jews of Amsterdam. He was a millionaire. He gave a lot of tzedakah. Her father was a lawyer and also substitute judge. She was born in Den Bosch, town in the southern part of Holland, but her father moved to The Hague because the possibilities of education, of chinuch, for Jewish children were not too good in Den Bosch, and in The Hague it was much better. So he grew up in The Hague, and both also, her parents were religious. Her father was also a Zionist. Was very uncommon for an intellectual to be a Zionist. He was the chairman of the Mizrahi chapter in The Hague. He passed away rather young, and then she voted she sought as her duty for her further life to remain religious. Both my father was Leon van Dijk, my mother was called Betty van der Heijden. You see, very, very Dutch names. There are no more Dutch names than that. They met each other in the Zionist youth movement, and they married in 1938, and after 1939 I was born. The Dutch hoped to remain neutral in the Second World War like they were in the First World War. But of course Hitler had other plans, and in 10th of May 1940 the German army, by parachutes and by armored armies, invaded Holland like they did in Belgium and France. The Dutch army was small, not well equipped. The fighting morale was not always too good, so the Dutch surrendered after 4 days. But there was one place the Germans were met by stubborn defense, and that was in the town where I lived, in Rotterdam. There was the elite corps of the Dutch army, the Marines, like I think in every country they are an elite, and they managed to stop the German advance to the town of Hague. There was the government resided, and the Queen had her palace. And then the Germans decided to teach the Dutch a lesson, and they bombed the whole center of Rotterdam. Thousands of houses were burned. Something like 1,500 people were killed. Thousands were wounded, and after this, and they threatened to the next town was already on their list, and then the Dutch surrendered. From the first time of the war, of course, I was a little baby. I don't remember anything. But what I do remember, there are some very sharp reminiscences that make obviously on me a very strong impression. One of the things was that we lived near a kindergarten. And every day I saw the children go in one after the other to the kindergarten. All the children, apart from me. I never learned in a kindergarten. I was playing alone in the courtyard before our house. Totally alone. I accepted it as natural. I never ask why not, but so it was life. Another thing, of course, the reason was only after much later I learned that the Germans forbid that Jewish pupils or Jewish students would visit kindergartens, schools, high schools, university, and in our town where there was not a Jewish kindergarten, and so all the skills little children learn in the kindergarten I never achieved. Another thing, we lived adjacent to a very nice and very, for in my own eyes, a little child, very large public garden. And every day in the afternoon, my mother went to walk in the garden. One day she told me, "Look here, from now on, it is forbidden for you to enter the public garden. If you don't listen and you enter the garden, the police will come and take you away, and you will never see your father and your mother, mom and dad." Of course I didn't understand, but it made a big impression on me. And I didn't enter the kindergarten, the public garden, but once I was seduced by a non-Jewish child from the neighbors. I remember exactly why. There were a lot of insects on the trees, and it was a very peculiar view. And he managed to seduce me. So I went, and something like worms or something like that. I don't remember how I got out of the public garden, but what I do remember very vividly, that when I came home, my father and my mother, my parents, screamed at me furious like crazy. I never saw or heard them before or after. Of course, I didn't understand anything. So I entered the public garden. So what? What I didn't understand was what could be the result of my deed. Like everywhere in the occupied countries, the Germans had all sorts of laws against the Jews, and one of the laws was that it was totally forbidden for a Jew to enter public garden. And it was enough.
How old were you when this incident happened?
3, not more. And it was enough that one of the Dutch, non-Jewish of course, Dutch traitors or collaborators would see me in the garden, would rush to the German police and tell them that Jewish child is and then the Jews already knew, the whole family would be sent eastward, they didn't know where, But one thing was sure, you never heard something from the people who were sent to the unknown. Sometimes the families in the beginning got an urn with ashes of their beloved ones. Now we know that place was Mauthausen in Austria. Mauthausen is not an extermination camp, but it is one of the most, it was one of the most terrible concentration camps. And all the Jews who were sent there from the Netherlands to Mauthausen, all of them were within 2 months were dead. Either they committed suicide because they couldn't stand the tortures, or they were worked to death. So that was the reason that my parents were crazy. What happened, that a good non-Jewish neighbor, a woman, saw me in the kindergarten, in the public garden, rushed to my mother and told her, "Your son is there." My mother, very quick, of course, asked some other neighbor to enter the public garden and to fetch me from there, and so she did. But if not, I would not tell my story. Another event that I remember very well, that I saw one day, I saw my parents stand before the closed curtains. In Holland, every house has curtains for the windows, for the curtains, and staring outside, and they were frozen. They didn't utter one word. Of course, I was very curious, and I did the same. And then I saw in our street, it was a very little quiet street, I saw a yellow autobus, a yellow bus. The buses of the municipal transport company were yellow. And I never saw a bus like this in our street. Of course, I didn't understand anything. Afterwards, I did understand. Like everywhere in occupied Europe, the Germans had prepared lists with the addresses of the Jews. They went from house to house. That means not the Germans themselves. They didn't have enough not soldiers to do that. It was done by Dutch policemen and by Dutch members of the Dutch Nazi Party, the NSB, National Socialist Beweging. And they took the Jews out of their houses, loaded them in an autobus, in the bus, and then the bus went to a place in the port. There was a railway there. The place was surrounded by high walls, especially, of course, the German chose that place in order that nobody could see what's going on there. And there was a big hangar then, and from there the Jews were mostly in cattle cars, were loaded in those cars, and off they went either to one of two concentration camps in Holland. Most of them were transported to the concentration camp of Westerbork in northern Holland, in an extremely remote place. I have to tell you that when I once visited Holland from here with my wife, we hired a car and we wanted to take this place, what was left of it. And we drove and we drove and we drove. It was really at the end of the world. And from there, in that the camp of that camp of Westerbork, it was not an extermination camp. It was a passage camp. From the conditions were very difficult, but it was possible to bear them, even to deceive the Jews. They gave them some possibilities to feel well. Sometimes they had a cabaret, and there was even an illegal synagogue. But from there, every Tuesday, a train, a Dutch train, came from, I don't know from where. And for instance, on the train were placards, Auschwitzim, in Dutch and in German. Auschwitz, or in Polish, Auschwitzim, and from there, every week, Tuesday, there was a transport, was in approximately 1,500 Dutch Jews to the extermination camps of Auschwitz or Sobibor. Few trains went to Bergen-Belsen or Theresienstadt. And so 85% of Dutch Jewry, more than 100,000 Jews, were killed in that way. By the way, I thought it was a Dutch train for the Dutch railway company. And the policemen were Dutch, and the government and the Queen, they fled to London when Holland capitulated. But there was something like the administration remained. She was of course, at the head of the administration of all the various departments, were what is called in Dutch secretaris-generaal, so we would say CEOs, and they ruled the Dutch administration, and all the departments, they worked smoothly and quietly with the Germans. That was the internal office and the police and the justice the office and the labor office, you name it, all the offices. Most of those people, certainly at the head, they didn't hate Jews, but either they did it because they were afraid of the German, because it was well known what would happen when you refuse to go along with the German orders. So there were some 2 or 3 anti-Semites, but they were pushed in by the German itself. There were a lot of indifferent, and I think also one of the reasons was something typical for the Netherlands, due to the Calvinist influence. You have to obey the government. That doesn't matter who is the government, but it is God's will that you obey the government, be it the Queen or be it the German occupiers. And also, don't ask what are the orders. As a public servant, you have to obey orders. I think those are the 4 reasons for the rather big cooperation of the Dutch administrative apparatus with the Germans, with the persecution of the Jews. My father was very soon, like all Jews in public services, he was fired. and that there was no difference between the president of the Supreme Court or somebody who cleaned the street. They were all fired, together with all pupils. So like I told you that already, from the kindergarten to university, were thrown out of the education institutes, and all the doctors and apothecaries were forbidden to treat non-Jews, only Jewish patients. Now, my father, I told me before, he was working in the education department of the Rotterdam municipality. As it's well known in nearly all the countries that were under German occupation, the Germans founded Judenräte, the Council of Jews. Everybody knows that. They're from Lithuania, from Poland. They were too well known, I should say. Officially, the duty of the Judenräte was to manage the internal affairs of the Jews, but of course today we know their real duty was to help the Germans, willingly or non-willingly, to perform smoothly and quietly, without any problems, the extermination of the Jews. And in Holland, of course, also the Germans founded what's in Dutch called the Joodse Raad. Very Dutch and German are very there are not many differences between them. And the Joodse Raad, they founded in every town there were Jewish pupils in the basic schools, in the high schools, schools for the Jewish children. And those they could both give work to all the teachers, and of course teach the Jewish children. And as my father had administrative experience with education problems, he was approached by the Joodse Raad if he was willing to accept a post in the Jewish Lyceum, the Jewish high school, as an I should say, as an administrator. Of course, he was extremely glad to accept this proposal, but not only that he would earn something, but he was nearly without income, but what was much more important, one of the tricks of the German was everybody who was without work was automatically sent to a work camp in Holland, not an actual concentration camp, a work camp. There were forced labor, a labor camp, but at a certain date, all the Jews who were in those camps were transported to Westerbork, and a very few, of course, came back. So he got in his, you will see it later on, he got in the identity card both of the Joodse Raad, the Judenraad, and of the Dutch identity card. He got in writing that it was also by the German authorities. He got they wrote that Mr. Leon van Dijk was vital for the Jewish community, and therefore his transport to labor in the East. That was the euphemistic name from the German, of course, for the concentration camps, was postponed for the time being. And that was, of course, that stamp and was more than 1 million. So he worked there in the Jewish high school, and approximately 1942, after the Germans registered all the Jews and concentrated a lot of them in Amsterdam. It was easier to take all of them out of Amsterdam. The massive transports to Westerbork and also to the concentration camp, notorious concentration camp in Vught, where the conditions were terrible in the southern part of the Netherlands, started. And in 1943, in the beginning of the summer, nearly all the Jews of Netherlands were transported already either to the concentration camps or eastwards, and the Netherlands were nearly Judenrein, like the Germans called. And as my parents belonged to the very few Jews who remained in Rotterdam, of course our time had also come, and we got a decree before Pesach. It was brought by us, but also again by Dutch policemen. We got a notice that we had the third day of Pesach, we had to go to the notorious concentration camp of Vught in the now southern part of the Netherlands. Notorious, of course, the people knew, but not it was not written. The work of the Germans in order to deceive the Jews was so how do you call it, was so it was so effective that they could bring everybody has to take one rucksack. They could take their rucksack with their belongings to the offices of the Joodse Raad, and then the Germans of the Joodse Raad would take care of bringing them to that place in the port. In order to deceive the Jews that it was not so terrible, even though that they didn't have to schlep their belongings. My parents, after they got that paper, they asked us, what will we do? In a few days it will be Pesach. Will we make Pesach like always? Let's leave it. Why should we bother? And they decide very strongly, we will make Pesach like always, according to all the rules of Pesach. My mother took an oath that if we would come back alive, she would never complain about the cleaning up of Pesach. And indeed, I never heard my mother utter one complaint, and she cleaned up the house unbelievable. Can I make a little stop? One more. Okay. The second day of Pesach, Yom Sheni Shel Galiot, my parents got a visit one good friend of us, our family doctor, Dr. David Hausdorff, came to see my parents. He was, he was a physician. He was a very competent family physician. He was a Talmid Chacham. He was one of the leading persons of the Agudat Yisrael. He was what today we would say he was a Haredi. And as much as my father was a Zionist, he was an anti-Zionist. But instead of this, there were some family connections between us, no strong connections. But in spite of that, they were very good friends. And he asked my father, Mama, how are things going? My father told, look here, you know, tomorrow we have to go to the concentration camp of Vught. He told my father, why don't you use your letter? Now I have to explain about which letter, about which letter he meant. Long before, my father got a letter from the Jewish agency in the office of the Jewish agency in Geneva, in Switzerland. Switzerland was neutral, of course. In order to notify him that Mr. Leon van Dijk and his wife and family are registered for immigration to Palestine from the occupied Netherlands when there will be a possibility to immigrate to Palestine. And his number, his registration number is such and such. With this letter, my father he got this letter because his Zionist friends got him on this list. And my father went to the Judenraad, and they wrote in his ID card of the Judenraad that Mr. Van Dijk is intending to immigrate, and within a short time, something like that. My father asked Dr. Hausdorff, what do you mean? And he told him there was another Jew in Rotterdam, David Cohn, Hashem Yikom et Damo, who was very active in the Mizrahi movement, and he got also the same letter, and he got also a decree that he had to go to the concentration camp. With that, he went to the Dutch Nazi police, and he got postponement of the transport. And David Hausdorff told him, why don't you do it the same? My father, excellent idea. He didn't wait any minute. He went on foot, of course, to the headquarters of the Dutch Nazi police. It was a long walk, an hour or so. He had to wait there at least an hour or more until the Dutch major of the police was willing to see him. And he asked my father, what do you want? My father said, look here, tomorrow we have to leave for the concentration camp of Vught, but we are leaving to Palestine in a short time. And then the incredible happened. It's only what you can in Hebrew say it was a nes, a miracle. The officer should have said to my father, Mr. Van Dijk, don't tell me stories. Germany is in a terrible war involved with Britain, and Palestine is under British rule. From Holland, nobody can leave Holland to no place. What do you think? You can go to Palestine. Instead, he asked my father only, when do you leave? And my father told, oh, in a very short time, the papers are already underway. And then he took that paper with the destinations of the concentration camp. We have it still today. And in his handwriting, he wrote, the family Van Dijk is emigrating. His transport to concentration camp is postponed for 4 weeks. Signed and sent my father home. My father went home. In the way he went to the offices of the Jews, of the Joodse Raad, the Judenraad, and in order to tell them that the ruckpack should be sent back to our home. And when he came home after a long time, my mother was hysterical, of course. They thought such a long time. They arrested my father. But no, we got postponement of 4 weeks, another 4 weeks even. But my parents knew the ground was burning under their feet, and there were no Jews left in Rotterdam. My father desperately tried to find a hiding place or to flee to Switzerland. The last thing was impossible. They got a proposal that both adults could stay in one place, but they had to separate themselves from me, and I should go to another place. And then they stood for a terrible dilemma. To separate from me, and nobody knows if they should see me again. And they decide, for better or for worse, we are going all together, or to the concentration camp, or to a hiding place. I don't know what I would have decided. It was a terrible decision, but they did it. One of these days, my father went to a barber shop, and was the only Jewish barbershop that was left there, and he met a friend, a boy Frank, and they started talking. We're talking about how do you do, what do you do? My father told him the story, and the boy Frank told him, look here, it might be that I have a place for you, because I have 2 ounce, and they got a hiding place, but they got another hiding place. So there's a spare hiding place for 2 people. My father said, oh, that's fine, but what about the child? He told, let's see, I have connections with the Dutch resistance movement, what's called in Dutch the ondergrondse, the underground. We'll ask those people. The next day he came to my house of my parents and told them the people agreed to accept you, and when we told them there's a little child, they told where the parents are, there belongs also the child. And you have to understand that taking 2 adults, hiding them, that was very dangerous. But a little child that could unwillingly draw the attention of somebody that they were Jews, much more. But so now things went very quickly. A few days later, people from the resistance movement came to my parents to take their rucksacks with personal belongings. Unbelievable. My mother was so keen that they thought, when I'll be there in a hiding place, I have a little child, I must tell him stories. So she took also some Dutch books for children. I don't understand how she could think about it, but it was a fact. We will see that it was very effective. And And one nice summer evening in June, 6th of June, my parents suddenly told me, we'll go for a walk. I was astonished. I knew in the evening we never got out because there was a curfew for Jews. Later on also for the non-Jews, but then there was a curfew. And when...
Could I just ask you, did you have the Seder? Did your parents make the Seder?
We had a Seder even with matzahs.
And you remember that Seder?
That Seder I remember, my mother, that I remember very dimly. But the next Seder, I explain you, I remember very vividly. But we have a Seder. It might be that even I said Mother Stana, but I don't remember it very sharp. And when they would caught and when you would catch a Jew during the curfew, well, that meant he's dead. We went out of our house in a strange environment. I didn't know the street. Suddenly, in an unknown street for me, and door opened. There was a woman. I remember very well. She was very fat and had a black dress. And the Winsters managed to come in. They closed the door after us, and then the first thing they did, and that I remember very well, they took my parents to the kitchen and took off their yellow badge. Of course, like in Germany and Poland and so forth, the Jews had to go with a yellow badge. In Holland it was very similar to the German. It was a yellow Magen David, and inside it was written in Dutch, but it looked like Hebrew characters, Jood, Jew. I was too small for it, only the children after 3. So they put off that. My mother put me to bed. I didn't ask anything. I don't know why children like us, we didn't ask more questions. But I didn't ask anything. In my feeling, in the middle of the night, it was still dark outside, it was cold, I was shivering. My mother waked me up, dressed me. I thought, what happened? What is it? Shh, don't ask anything. Don't speak a word. We left that house, went some distance, 100 meters or something. There waited a van. The door of the cabin opened. We got inside. The driver started the engine, and off we went. That I don't remember, but I remember that under the way I shoot some familiar quarter with little white houses. Oh, I thought always that the dwarfs were living in that little houses, that small houses. But I thought, oh, the white village. And my parents looked at me, and I started. It was forbidden to say one word, so I don't remember that. But my parents told me later. There was a German roadblock, but the driver waved some papers, and they let him go. They didn't look in the truck. And 20 minutes later we came in a little village. It was the village of Vlaardingen, not far from Rotterdam, 40 kilometers like that. And the driver let us off, and off he drove. No word was said. It took only 1983 that my parents met this man. We didn't know he was the brother of one of the women who would hide us, and he worked for the Dutch resistance. During the day he worked for the Dutch army, for the German army, the Wehrmacht, and therefore he had papers. And in the night, during the night, he worked for the Dutch resistance and transported Jews and resistance workers who were persecuted by the Germans. We went to some distance, and then we saw again a house. The door opened. There was some wife. She was waving. Some woman. She was waving us. We went inside. We were admitted very friendly. We waited there for some time. I saw in the corner of the corner of the house of that room there was a cot and what in my eyes like a child of 3, I thought it was a monster, but it was not. Of course, it was not a monster. It was a little child with Down syndrome. Those people, the family Don, Gerrit and Maria Don, they were the very devout Protestants. And they saw it as their duty to save Jews because they were the people of God. And they, in their home, they hid 3 Jewish children, one of them with Down syndrome. The parents of this child didn't come back, and they raised him until he passed away in his 40s or something like that. Gerrit Don was known in the circles of the resistance as the specialist for Jews, because he looked for and found a lot of places to hide Jews. Vlaardingen was a very small town. There were very few Jews there, but I think something like 20 Jews he found hiding places. Most of them survived, not all of them, because like everywhere in the Netherlands, there were people who knew of them, and for 2.5 guilders, they told the Germans that they were Jews. But most of them, I think, they were saved. Also, he and his wife also helped us afterwards. I explained about what. we left this house. Mrs. Don led us to the outskirts of the little village. There was a road in the fields, and both sides of the road was a canal, like nearly everywhere in Holland, with trees planted along the road. And then we came to a little house. That is a house. Okay. Little house. There again, there in the door stood somebody, a tall woman who was waving to us, and there we stayed nearly 2 years, from June 43 to 5th of May 1945. Who were those people? They were a couple without children. The family Ruigrok, even for the Netherlands, is a very uncommon name. Magiel, in short, in Dutch, Giel, and Margaretha, in Dutch, in short, Grey Ruigrok. They had an adopted Hungarian daughter. She that grew in their family, and 17, 18 years. And they had a dog. Dog was named Charlie, and Charlie was some uncertain race. Was a very friendly dog. He didn't do us any harm, never. But he had some peculiar quality. Before the house there was a kennel, and over the kennel was a little wooden bridge. And whenever Charlie heard steps, unfamiliar steps on the wooden bridge, he started to bark. It was unbelievable. He was an infallible alarm machine. He never missed, and he saved us several times. That when he started barking, we knew we have to be quiet, and nobody should see us, and nobody should hear us. There was a very little house. It was so little. It was a very small house. It was so small. I think that it was not longer than this room. It was divided. We will see it later on. It divided in a front room, in a small front room, where the family of Ruigrok lived, and with their daughter, his stepdaughter, and a little bigger room where we, the Jews, lived. Between there were sliding doors, like here, with curtains, so somebody in the front room would never see what went on in the back room. Under the roof there was sleeping, and there was a bedroom, and there were cots, mattresses where we could sleep under the roof. I was very glad there, because I was a child from the town, and it was outside, and Giel had a little garden. He grew there some vegetables. He kept rabbits, not for the fun out, but to eat their meat. And he had no children, so he was very fond of me. Within a short time, within a month, in August, my parents tried also to bring my uncle and aunt and my grandmother, the mother of my mother, and her brother and sister-in-law, and also two little children, also to the family Ruigrok. But the day before she could reach them, they were already arrested, and nobody came back. But then we came a little later. My parents got a letter from family Hausdorff. Dr. Hausdorff as doctor, and also he was not a member of the Judenrat, but he worked for them. He did very good work. He always tried to save Jews. He knew that also his time has come, and it is a matter of days that he will be deported. And he wrote my letters. He knew the address. If perhaps there would be a possibility that he would also come to our hiding place. My parents, of course, agreed, but they asked the Ruigrok family. And the Ruigrok family answered without any hesitation, we agree, but what is your opinion? Because, of course, to hide 2 Jews and a little child, that's one thing. But 4 adults, and 4, they had 3 children of the same age of me, 6, 5 and 4. I was already 4. That's tremendous danger. And they knew, the familie, that if they would be caught, their fate would be exactly like the fate of the Jews. They would be killed, or they would be sent in a concentration camp, what meant a very slowly and terrible death. But they didn't hesitate any moment. By the way, also when Gerrit Ruigrok, who worked at the Giel, he was a simple worker in the soap factory of the Sunlight factory of the Unilever, and Mr. Don also worked there. And when he approached Giel Ruigrok, if he was willing to accept Jews, to hide Jews, he went to home. In less than 5 minutes, they decided they had to do it. He told his wife, when we are in the possibility to save Jews from the nails of the Nazis, that's our duty. They were very devout Catholics. They were, how do you call it? Psadim.
They were like idols.
Pardon?
Idols. Not idols, but they were...
of Maria, of Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't remember about it, I'm sorry. And
statues, they had statues.
Statues. In the house. They never met any Jew.
Wow.
But they didn't hesitate a moment. So within a short time, all 8 Jews, 4 adults, and 4 little children, the Hausdorff family had 1 daughter, 6, Lily, and one son of 5, Bernard, today his name is Dov, and 1 little son, exactly my age, of 4, Ernst, Asher. When they did it, it was so tiny house that when the German army, officers of German army, came to look for houses that they could billet their soldiers, they passed this house. But in that house, even you can't, even a match cannot be there. And then they were already 8 Jews. By the way, the Ruigrok family had enormous respect for Dr. Hausdorff because he was a physician. They gave him and his wife their sleeping room, their bedroom, and they went in another very small something under the roof. By the way, Dr. Hausdorff, before he left for the hiding place, he had a beard, but of course he shaved his beard because he knew it was too dangerous. And when his children saw him the first time, they didn't recognize him. Okay. Now there was of course several problems. One of the problems was that when in the evening some friends would visit the Ruigrok family, it was of course forbidden that anybody should know there were 8 people in the back room. So what did my parents? Every adult took a child on his nap, And in order that we should be quiet, they gave us bandages. And we played nurse or doctor, and we bandaged the heads and the neck of our parents, everything, the nose and the ears and the eyes and everything. But bandages don't make noise. And so it went on until we were very tired, fell asleep. And Giel, every time he found some excuse, he left the front room, entered very quietly the back room, took one child in his arms, went up the stairs without making any noise, and put a child on his mattress, on his cot. And so he did it 4 times. Nobody ever had any suspicion even. But one time we were very disciplined children. I don't know why. My children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, it's impossible to imagine even. Obviously, we felt that was not a normal life. I don't remember much of the first years of the war, I told you. But one thing I remember, that the atmosphere at our home was of tension, something intangible, but tension and fear. I cannot explain it. Only once I read a book of a Jewish writer from Holland, and he described perfectly the life of the Jews in that period. She went through everything also, and then suddenly I had the same feeling. I the same feeling that I had in that time. Anyhow, another problem was what to do with the children. Of course, we couldn't go to school or to kindergarten. So in the back of the house, there was a little closed veranda, and that was there we played as children. We had some wooden blocks, not mere, very few. It was very far from the road. At the other side of the house was an orchard of apple trees. Nobody came there, so nobody could hear or see us. The windows of the back room, we knew it was dangerous to stand there before, because of we will see it in a moment on the photo. The house was stand there alone in the fields, but there were surrounding houses within eye distance. So it was forbidden that somebody should, even from far away, should see us. And we knew one of the neighbors over there was a Dutch collaborator with the Germans. So it would be immensely dangerous that he should see us. After the war, the same day after the war, he was arrested. But after a few days he was set on free, because he told the Dutch authorities that he knew there were the Jews there, but he never told the Germans. So that is how he was not a dangerous man.
And was it true?
Huh?
Was it true?
Yes, I believe, because when he was arrested, already nearly nobody knew. He was arrested the day after the liberation, the same day of the liberation of Holland. He was arrested, so nobody knew officially that there were Jews.
Yehuda, can I just ask you, the stepdaughter from Hungary,
Okay.
Was she very friendly? Did she also?
No. There was you are right. The natural. That is of course very good question. No, she was totally no. So that is total solidarity with the parents. She hated the Germans. She helped us. She helped in every respect. In that time, there was very simple. People were either good or wrong. Good was when you hated the Germans, and wrong when you collaborated with them. And he was 100% good.
Do you remember her name?
Pardon?
Do you remember her name?
Iboika. Yes, sure, I know. And you'll see her on the one of the photos, yes. She has also, that's her first name. She had an Hungarian name, very difficult for me to pronounce, like every but Iboika, I know. And another problem was, what do we with the children? And then our parents decided to make a school for the children. My mother had no experience with teaching at all, but she was a tremendous good teacher. She taught me reading and writing in Dutch and in Hebrew. I remember very well with every letter of the Hebrew alphabet. She told me a story, the funny story, so I remember the letters. And within a short time, was obvious I was an intelligent child. I knew reading and writing, and that was I tell why was that so good. That was extremely good because, especially during the last year, I was all the time sick. I was all the time ill. I spent a lot of time in my cot under the roof, and then my mother gave me books to read, and I could read them. And also she brought the children's Bible in Dutch, also from the same writer, Clara Ascher-Pinkhoff, written in a style for children, all the stories of the Tanakh, and there was also a book with stories about two children, a boy and a girl, who in an old house under the roof. They found a big case with dresses from previous centuries, and they dressed it, and that moment they lived in that century. So I read all the stories from the time of the German tribes, the Bataven, the Roman time until the middle of the 17th century, but then it stopped. But as a result, for my whole life, I love history. I'm fond of reading books of history. So I could, I could read, and that was very important. I could read, and it was quiet. And Dr. Hausdorff, he taught us Torah, Chumash, of course not like here. He taught us translating the Torah, the Chumash, from Hebrew in Dutch, of course in the Ashkenazi pronunciation, and I'm very good. I remember very good. The first sentence was the Akedah Yitzchak, Vayi Achreya Devrim Ma'elu Vashem V'Elokim B'Ra'er Nisat Avraham. How do you translate it for a child after those events? God wanted to know, wanted to see that Abraham was a good man. And so we learned to daven. I davened every day. Dit is my parents took with them a little. I got this siddur. It is a Dutch siddur. I got it from my grandmother. I never saw her. She passed away in 1941, and I got it from her. And I davened every day in the morning and every night before I went to sleep. In a rak.
And this is the siddur.
Dit is de siddur.
And it was, wow. And it's published in Amsterdam.
Ja. Ja. We learned to make brochures. We had a seder. Even we had then a good friend of Dr. Hausdorff, the lawyer Alex de Haas, who lived in Utrecht. He was not deported, but in secret he made matzahs, and he managed to send us 3 matzahs. He knew where we were, and I remember we learned Manishtana, Avadim Hayinu. I learned to read and to translate it. My mother taught me, and my father had a very good voice, and I remember until today the nigunim of the seder. If this I don't remember, but I was told even Dr. Hausdorff brought a shofar with him, and he on Rosh Hashanah he blew, and then the Ruigrok family, they never heard, of course, a shofar. They thought somebody was murdered.
Oy.
And they came immediately, and they were frightened. So they had to explain them and to ask for, to excuse themselves. And told them, look here, it's okay, you may blow the shofar, but you have to tell us before. And Friday evening, we are sitting together after a meal, very meager meal, of course, in the dark. But we are singing Zemirot, wow. And nobody could hear us. We were in the back room, and really I felt the atmosphere of Shabbat. In spite of that, was I a little child. Of course, our life in the hiding place was not an idyll. You have to take into account there were 11 people in a little place, crowded, with different mentality. The Goy's mentality is totally different from Jews' mentality. Different views. Of course, there were tensions. As children, we didn't feel it so, but very little. But there were, of course, there were tensions.
Can I ask, what did you do for food? What did you do for food?
Of course. I'll tell you. I'll tell you in a moment. And there was of course, the danger was imminent. Everywhere was danger. Perhaps if there will be sometimes, I'll to tell how we were saved. And of course, the food is very important. Of course, the food in Holland, like everywhere in Europe, was rationed. And in order to get food, you had to give coupons. Now, the satanic way the Germans planned this, was in order to get a coupon for food, you had to show your ID card. But on the ID card of a Jew was a big J, Jude, Jood, Jew. So no Jew could use his ID card. So what the resistance movement did, they organized armed attacks on the offices where those coupons were distributed, very often with the silent cooperations of the public servants there who were in their complot, and they raided those offices and took tens of thousands of coupons. And they distributed those coupons between the Jews and also between the illegal workers who could not show themselves, no place. So we got rations food, and Mr. Don, he brought us those coupons. Mrs. Don every month came to cut the hair of us children. Of course, nobody could go to barber. Both men were nearly bald. That was not so problematic. But so they're very trivial things that were vital. And of course, that's also very important to understand. In order to save one Jew, there was necessity not only the people who saved them, but of a much larger network of people who helped them, and also people who knew but kept their mouths closed. For instance, there was a good friend, a lady of the Ruigrok family. He visited them frequently. Her name was very strange. Struis, that is Autriche. It was forbidden that we should understand that she would have the slightest suspicion, because she was a good woman, but she couldn't keep her mouth shut. And if she would know, the next week all the people of Vlaardingen would know, but she never knew. So we go to where God. Only that, and in a moment I'll tell you, only the last winter was very difficult, and we were very hungry. What kashrut, there were no problems. We got it. We didn't get meat, and once there was my Ruigrok family got some meat. We didn't eat of that.
Can I just ask, did the family ever ask what you were doing, or if you could explain Shabbat, or
Pardon?
Did they ever want to know more about Judaism?
No, they didn't. No, they were very. This man, Giel Ruigrok, he was an unbelievable good man. They were very devoted Catholics. When we came, he told my father, "Look here. We are Catholics, you are Jews, everybody remains faithful to his faith." And there were many cases that Jews were saved, but they were put under very big pressure to Christianize. Yeah. And sometimes they were baptized, but never. That's very unbelievable. Let me have a little break. They said, I don't think so. They let us live our Jewish practice, without any problem. I don't think, I don't remember, but I don't think parents didn't tell me that they asked a lot of questions. They knew, that we have our Sabbath, and they went on Sunday to the church, of course. But, of course, there was always imminent danger. I only very shortly two events. Once the German army trained in the fields surrounding that house, and suddenly there came a soldier, approached our house, and luckily Grey, who was a very tall woman, stood before the door, and she asked him, "What do you want?" I want to make use of the toilet. And then they said, he told him blankly, "We haven't one." "Where do you do?" Outside in the fields. And off he went. I guess cursing the Dutch, even they have no normal toilet. We were playing very did that. Another time, a little complicated, but I try to put it as short as possible. Dr. Hausdorff, his wife, and my mother went for, in the evening, a nice summer evening for a short walk, because they nearly never left the house. And it was dark, and thought nobody will see them. And they, in a very short distance from the house, suddenly they heard voices in German. Were never there. And they turned around and looked at the German put on a roadblock exactly before our home. The first reaction was we wanted to rush away, but they understood if they would do that, it was they would be caught. So they turned around and they slowly approached the roadblock. German soldier told them, "What are you doing? Don't you know there's curfew?" In that time there was also curfew for the non-Jews, for everybody. And my mother told in their best German, "Well, you see, it is a nice evening. We wanted to make a short walk. Where do you live?" And my mother showed away in a little house, some distance away, where the sisters and the brothers, all bachelors of Grey, lived. And then you say, ID cards. Now, my parents had, I have to explain, the ID cards in Holland, and the Holland, before the war, there was not such a thing, ID cards. But the German introduced it, and a Dutch collaborator devised it, and the ID cards were so difficult to falsify, so even today it is very difficult. And of course, as I told, for every Jew there was a big the black J in the ID card. Now my parents got real ID cards, also from the resistance movement. That was also where my armored raid was stolen from one office of another. But it was not falsified, because they remained their own identity. Both parents didn't look very Jews. They had real Dutch names, Leon van Dijk and Betty van der Heijden. By the way, I got also a new name, not Yehuda, Jan van Dijk. This is the most Dutch name, that is in order to have to emphasize. So they got that without the ominous J. But for the Hausdorff, that took much more time, because they had to get cards with a false identity. And they hadn't one, not yet. Later they got one, and Dr. David Hauster became Dirk Honig, a real Dutch name. But then they had not. So when my mother asked, he didn't dare to answer. Mrs. Hilde Hausdorff couldn't answer, but he came from Germany. She spoke perfect Dutch, but with a German accent. She couldn't open her mouth. So my mother asked that, no, where our ID cards are at home. Which home? And she showed their home. You two stay here, and my mother, you go to fetch the cards. Her mother rushed to home, entered like a storm in the house, told my father, quick, give me your ID card. What happened? Don't ask, give. My father gave. And then she went back to the German, put her on their hands, put her card above, and the card of Dr. for my father underneath. Now, both were of an average of 40 years, in their 40s. Both were bald, both were meager. There was not much to eat, but they were not alike. So the German looks at the card of stimmt, okay. And then the card of my father, it's not him. My father, yes, sir, it is him. It is now dark, but he's a little pale, but it is him. And then an unbelievable happened. He gave them a strong speech. That's forbidden for Dutch people to go out in the curfew, and let them go. They didn't go, of course, in the house. They went to that house, and there they hid until Giel told them. They came to it that he was he observed that the German had come. Now, what happened? How was it possible that the German soldier let them go? Only the same evening they heard what happened. The German shot down an American plane. Or a British plane, I think it's American. Before the Germans could catch the both pilots who jumped down with a parachute, Dutch workers of the resistance movement got them and brought them to a safe house. And the German looked in all the surroundings for those pilots. And the German soldier saw that pilots are young, healthy men and not old, pale, meager men. So he let them go. He was not looking for Jews, he was looking for pilots. By the way, Mr. Don, he smuggled those pilots, and they got within a relative short time into England, through Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal, and returned to action. Okay, so the danger was lurking in every moment. You could. Now, then came the last winter. It was very, very difficult. As it is well known, the Allied forces tried to conquer the bridge at Arnhem in Holland. There's a famous movie, The Last Bridge, and from down to from the south through Arnhem over the Rhine to invade Germany. And then really the days in September, I remember very well. All the Germans and the Dutch traitors fled. I remember Gray came down from the staircases dressed in a Dutch flag. Blue, white, red, white, blue. After a few days, when everything went wrong, Every day they came back. And then there was the Dutch government who, with the Queen, who fled to London. The government in exile ordered all the railways personnel to strike in order not to enable the Germans to bring troops to the front. By the way, during the beginning of the war, during the deportations, we know now the resistance movement asked the Dutch government's exile to proclaim also a strike in order to save the Jews. When they went to Germany they went to Poland with Dutch trains, but the government exile refused. But it would worsen the position of the Dutch population. Of course, the Jews were not so important. But then they striked. So there were no trains. It was a terrible cold winter. All the kettles were frozen. There was no possibility to bring food by ship. There was no fuel. There was no benzine.
Petrol.
There was no petrol. There were nearly no cars, and even there were no cars with horses, because the German requisited everything, and a large part of the food was stolen by the Germans to bring and brought to Germany. So it was a terrible famine, and it was also extremely cold. And for us, for children, it was rather difficult. We were cold. We had hunger. So we told our parents, we are hungry. In Dutch, wij hebben honger. Our parents told us it's forbidden to say we are hungry, because hungry only the people in the concentration camps are. But then already it was more or less known what happened there. So we invented another word. We have appetite. In Dutch, we hebben trek. And that was also forbidden. So we invented a new word, hot trek. So it's a combination of both words. You can't silence a child. But but we were relatively lucky. My mother went out in the fields near every few days. She didn't look Jewish, and in order to buy illegality, it was forbidden, of course, milk with friendly farmers in the environment. Sometimes I accompanied her, and then she brought some milk for us. My father with Giel made a long trek with a sledge in the snow to the island of Rosenberg. It's quite far from Vlaardingen. There was still food, and there were friendly farmers who knew Giel, who were willing to sell him. Now, you couldn't buy food with money. Money had no worth. But at the same time, the good Germans also dismantled all the soap factory of the Sunlight factory, and transported also to Germany. Now the directors of the factory told the workers, boys, try to fetch as much as you can from what is in the factory. It's better that you take it than the German. So Giel brought home large pieces of soap. Now that sounds perhaps ridiculous, but soap was then worth more than diamonds. It was no toilet soap. It was it was soap what's used for the laundry. Big big yellow pieces. But that was worth a fortune. So he bought food with soap. Also, we had nearly nothing to warm, to heat our house. There was no petrol, there was no gas for cooking out. There were no coals. In that time, the heating was done with coal. There was nothing, only wood. And now Gil and his daughter, stepdaughter, were very creative. Boyka bribed Dutch forced laborers who had to bring long wooden poles to the German defense works. They put them in the fields with barbed wire between them, in order when there would be an attack by parachutists, they will fall on the pointed poles or on the barbed wire. And they bribed it with soap and told them, look here, when you come with your cart with two horses along to our house, you pass our house, let some poles fall in the canal. And so it happened. Those carts passed our house, and the man who led it, the horses, he made it pushed with his leg backward. One pole rolled down into the canal. He rode. Nothing happened. He didn't know anything. And the moment he was vanished, Giel and David Hausdorff and my father rushed outside, fetched the pole and chopped it to sticks. So we had something to eat. During this, the terror, as I told you, the famine was terrible, and the Dutch in the big towns really died nearly in the streets. The municipality of Vlaardingen make an public one moment a public kitchen, and everybody could come into the kitchen and get some soup. One day it was so-called, there was some green soup, and some day it was some brown soup. The taste and the smell was terrible, but it had some nutrition. And Boyka went also every day in order to get those soup. Now, it was a very small town, and everybody knew everybody. And also there were people who thought, those people of Ruigrok, who there were 3 people, got 11 portions. That's not fair. That's favoritism. So there were people who started asking why and then the people of the soup kitchen told them, shut up, don't ask. And luckily those people were what was called good people. They understood without asking any further question. And so nobody interfered. And I remember that the second or third or fourth day after liberation, we went for the first time, we as children and Boyka, to the soup kitchen, and then we entered, everybody started to applaud. That I remember until today. We even, when in the worst time, we eat sugar beets. That is for animals. That's for cows. Not for, but then we ate it. It was not bad, and even we ate the bulbs of tulips. And I can recommend it. Very good taste. And And then came the spring of 1945. we knew it was forbidden to listen it was forbidden to have a radio, but of course the family Reich also hid their radio, and we listened every day to the Dutch emission of the BBC, Radio Orange, by the Dutch government in exile, and we knew that on all the fronts, the Germans are beaten, and the encircling became now narrower and narrower. And then we made the last Seder in Pesach, the last Seder of Pesach, and there was no light. Of course, there was no light. In the beginning, was still in the winter. He was very inventive. He tapped illegally. He kept electricity from the German electricity. They have electricity, so we have a very tiny bulb of a bike in order to light the room. But it was totally, there was not light at all. We have light from the Pesach, then there is the light of the full moon. We had nothing, of course. We have no matzahs. We had colored water, and we had some bitter herb like mortar. The colored water was, of course, how do you call it? Was like white. But we made the cider. Mrs. Hausdorff, she wrote the whole Haggadah from memory. She had a very nice handwriting, so we as children could recite it, Manishtana, Avodim Mayinu, and the whole Seder. And in spite of my child, of course, it was very intuitively. I didn't realize what I'm feeling. But somewhere I realized that our Seder was the same like the first Seder of the Jewish people in Egypt before the next day that they were redempted from Egypt. En okay, by the way, I thought we have no light. It's not 100% right, because also Giel brought stearin from the factory, and for that was a little working place in the kitchen, a little factory. He made lights, stereo lights, like we use for Havdalah, for lighting, for Kabbalat Shabbat. So it was something in very few. A few of a short aken, and then when I tell this story to children, I tell the children, of course, you all have heard of man who came down from the sky to the earth. And I tell the children, I have seen, not really I personally, but we have seen that really food came down from the sky to the earth. What happened? The last days of the last weeks of the war, the German High Command, they understood that the war was lost, and they were afraid that they would put to trial as war criminals. Also because of this terrible famine that they caused. So they made an agreement with the Allied forces that the British and the Americans would send bombers through the mutually agreed corridors in the air, in the sky, to marked places in Holland, and there they would drop containers and cages with food for the Dutch population. And there was one condition, that the German would not shoot on those planes and would not interfere and not take the food for themselves. And so it happened. And so really, my parents really saw, I didn't so, but I remember very vividly, we saw those planes fly extremely low, so low that I could see the pilot in the cockpit, and they dropped, our parents saw them dropping the food. Only the one that day, there was a rumor that on the end of the road, they are giving chocolate that was also dropped. The pilots, in order, they were so enthusiastic, also for their own money, they bought the Czech chocolate, and also they dropped it for so that the children should have them. So I don't know how it's possible that I didn't ask anybody. I rushed to the end of the road, and really I got a very tiny piece of brown chocolate. I never ate it, never tasted it. It was a very good taste. But in the way, I lost one of my shows. And then suddenly I stood there with the chocolate, but without the show. That was a catastrophe, because there was no possibility to find any show for a child. And that's really a miracle. Somebody stood there with it. Is there any child who has lost his show? And I rushed in and fetched the show, and I came back with chocolate and a very tiny piece, and with my both shows. And a few days later, Friday evening, the children of Hausdorff, they lived at the front. They slept at the front part of the house, and I in the back yard. They called me, Bob, my hair, quick, come, you have to see it. And then suddenly I came. It was dark outside, but all the horizon was ablaze with fire. We didn't understand anything, because we know in the evening everything has to be black. But I didn't understand. And then at this very moment, Giel came up the stairs and told us in a festive way, children, the war is over, the Germans have capitulated, and we are free. And then he gave to everybody first a slice of white bread. It was more tasty than the best the torte or everything I ever get. I guess it was not so white, but in my memory it was white as snow. And then we were extremely glad, because also we had more or less a normal life, and we accepted it. We understood, and there were moments that even for us children, I remember there were moments that really I was despairing. When will there be an end of the war? And the next day, on the little bridge of the canal before our house, stood a man with a black helmet on his head, a blue overall, and a small, strange gun rifle in his hands. I never saw a soldier like that, but the disappointment was terrible. I thought, now that's the second time they have come back, and it is over. It was not a German. It was a soldier of the Dutch interior forces, And he was sent there to guard our house, that no German and no collaborator would try the last day to attack the Jews there.
Wow.
And then we say that the same day, a little later, we say there came cars, and on the motor and neck, the side of the cars, there were shoulders of the Dutch interior forces, and inside were those collaborators and traitors that we were so afraid of. And they were, of course, very humiliated, and we shouted, and unbelievable. And then for the first time I felt what means revenge. And really, we felt that those they were so afraid of, and now they are exactly in the same position like us. The same day that of the liberation, the same evening, Giel what was that fire? The Dutch burned all the placards, all the wooden signs of the German army. And they danced around those fires, and it was all at every place. There were a lot of signs of the army, were numerous. So the Dutch burned it at every place. So that that's what the fire we saw. The same evening, Giel stood with my father in the doorway and said, "Look here, Leon." He was a very simple man. He had no more than 6 years education, only basic school. He told him, "Look here, what we did is not only for you or for your children. It is also for the generations who will come." He had so a wise vision. Today, only the Hausdorff family, I think, has at least 300 siblings. Our family, I don't know, they cannot make the calculation, but altogether it is something between 100 and 200. All of them, nearly all of them are Shomrei Torah Mitzvot, are religious. And I think that is because of the, what you call the Mesirut Nefesh, how do you call it in good English, the willingness to sacrifice for Yiddishkeit, for Judaism. I'll give you one example. During that winter, that it was called the hunger winter, terrible winter. I don't know from where we got, Graagok got a chain of little sausages. Most probably they didn't contain any meat, but it was for us. And then our parents decided it is not kosher, we can still stand it, only our children will eat it, and we will not take anything from it. And I, as a little child, it was 5 years, but I remember it very well. When I was already many years in Israel, I came back to Vlaardingen to see Giel Geelgaard. The little house didn't exist. It was demolished for an autostrada, an highway, but they were an elderly home, but they were very alert, were very old, of course. Then they were in their 40s. And I had then 3 children, exactly in the same age like we were. My oldest daughter was 6 or 7, and then the second was 5, and my youngest was something like between 2 and 3, something like that. And we visited in there, and afterwards, of course, we told farewell each other from Giel. My wife, of course, was also with them. And then the first time in my life, I saw him weeping. He was crying. He was an extremely calm man. He had nerves of iron. In those tense days, it was enormous important. He never lost his mind. But then he started crying, and we both understood why. First of all, of course, we still understood it's the last time we see each other. But then also he saw that what he told my father about the next generations, he saw the next generation alive. We were exactly in the same, they were exactly in the same age like we were. And then he gave me a portrait of the home. I have it still today, of course. And with an aquarelle, a painting of his home, and he was right. In short, we afterwards Hausdorff returned very quick to the home. The home still was there and was occupied by Dutch traitor, so he was thrown out of his house, and he resumed his practice. He was taken on the shoulders of all his patients the first time when he showed himself in the street. We returned a little later. We had our home was taken over by the Goyim. We found a very tiny room under the roof. And later on, a few months, we found a real house. My parents continued, of course, to give us very strong religious education. I went on to learn a lot of Dr. Hausdorff. After my final exam, he sent his 2 sons with another cousin who with his mother, his daughter, his sister and their 3 children. His sister was her husband perished also in the war. Who took them in his home, and he raised the children as if they were their own children, and he sent them to Yeshiva called Torah in Jerusalem, and he proposed my parents that I should also go with them. I don't know, but I think he also furnished by his contact. He was the head of the Jewish community, had good contacts with the Jewish community in everywhere in Holland. That some fund was paying for my stay in the yeshiva. After 1 year, I came back. I started studying medicine.
Did you go to Kolter as well?
Yeah, I also. I studied there 1 year. After 1 year I came back. The others stayed 2 years. I studied medicine. I was very active in Bnei Akiva and in the Zionist Dutch student organization, also leading functions. And near the end of my studies, I met my wife, and then I finished my internship. We married, we made Aliyah, and since 1968, we are living here in Baruch Hashem. We are living in Israel. I worked for 50 years in in Shaare Tzedek Hospital. I started as in English it's called a house officer, and in American a resident, and I finished as the head of the geriatric clinical unit. And we had Beli Ain Hara, Chazdei Hashem, we had 5 children, 30 grandchildren, 16 grandchildren. A few weeks ago I was Sandik with the number 16. And every day I thank God, not only that He saved our lives. By the way, it is impossible to understand the courage of both families, Ruigrok and Don, what they did. But they knew, I told already before, when they would be caught, their fate would be as worse as of the Jews. But they did it because they felt it was their duty.
Were they given Chazidei Matana?
Yeah. That's right. Of course, we applied and got from the Pope a medal for the Ruigrok family. We had also to pay for it. My parents and the House of family. But there came a priest and a little ceremony and a nice speech, and they were very pleased with the papal medal. And of course, they were written in the Yad Vashem. The representative of the House of family and our family, our whole family. No, not I, but my family. My parents were there, still there. We planted trees on their names. Some years ago we had contact. The Ruigrok family passed away long ago. The representative of the Israeli embassy came to their home in order to give them the certificate of Yad Vashem. Mr. Don visited Israel, I visited him. His son also visited Israel some years ago, and both Dov and Asher, Zichrono Livracha, sadly he passed away a few years ago. We visited him, and we visited several times. We visited him until when he passed away. We were in email contact. And of course, as I told, I thank God every day that we are here, that we have this good privilege, that we have our own state with our own army, and who is willing to defend us against our manifold enemies. When I was a little child in the hiding place, the very few times that I was allowed to go out, the adults told me, when somebody is coming opposite you, don't look at him, look so that he will not see your nose, because you have a typical Jewish nose. My nose is curved. The Dutch non-Jewish nose are all straight. Here in Israel, everybody, also the Arabs, have a curved nose. But Baruch Hashem, when I see my children, my grandchildren, my grandchildren, all going in the way of Torah, ve'emunah, ve'mitzvot, all of them are living here in Israel. I can only be thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Yehuda, it is unbelievable, and I just want to thank you. I'm so grateful to you.
Okay, this is for you. Dit is an English report that I wrote some years ago for somebody who wanted to know, or in short, what we went through in the Holocaust. So you can't take it this home.
Yehuda, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. There are no words. There really are no words. The miracles, it's absolutely unbelievable. It's nissim, miracles upon miracles.
Yeah.
And there really are no words. And I'm so grateful to you. You should just continue having mazel and bracha and mevesrim. And I'm just so pleased that we did this tonight, and it is so valuable, and it's so special and so precious.
Thank you thank you very much, with pleasure. And I think what I did was my duty towards those courageously people who saved us, to tell it, to give to tell our story for the further generations.
Yehuda, can I ask you a very difficult question?
Yeah.
But a very important question. If you were in that position, knowing that you've got children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, what would you do? Would you sacrifice your family?
Every time when I am speaking for schools, that is every year, before or after Asra B'Tevet or Yom HaShoah, I'm telling that I'm asking myself the same questions. I have no answer, because it is such a difficult decision. I have no answer. I don't know if I'm courageously enough. Simply, I don't know. I hope I would be, but I have no answer.
Wow. Well, there is no answer, because it is, with the sacrifice that they did, it's unbelievable. The courage and it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Baruch Hashem, they did it. And Baruch Hashem, we can.
Okay, I had one more.
In the picture is your father.
This is my father, and this is Mr. Gerrit, and this is Maria Don, Mrs. Maria Don.
And the book.
From Ruigrok, I have. We'll see their pictures. There's another of perhaps of how do you call it? Of Yad Vashem, when they got the one moment. Gerrit Don, no, not Maria, Willy Don. And a rectification. Gerrit Don and Willy Don. Dit is de representative of the Israeli ambassade, and that is Mr. Gerrit Don and Mrs. Willy Don receiving a certificate of Yad Vashem.
Very, very special. Sure. And the cover of the book, it's a beautiful.
This is the child, the Down syndrome that they saved. What's his name? Presser. Eliezer Shlomo Presser.
And he stayed with them?
He stayed with them, yeah.
And they kept him Jewish?
They kept him, yeah. They kept him, yeah, yes.
That's also unbelievable.
Yeah. As to the best of my knowledge, he was not baptized or something like that.
It's amazing.
I wanted you to show. Okay, that's the ID card of my father with a big J, and here you see the stamp of the German that it's written that he is how do you call it? And is administrator, concierge of the Jewish Lyceum in the Rotterdam, and he's vital for the Jewish community. Tell me when you...
Okay.
Okay. Look at the look of my father, and well fed, smiling, pleasant person. Dit is de kaart of de Joodse Raad, de Judenraad. There's also same here is written that he's administrator of the Jewish Lyceum, and he's candidate for immigration. And look here at his face, much meager,
very pale,
tense, afraid, I should say, suspicious, not a happy person. Okay, that is the letter of the Jewish Agency, Office Palestinien de Swiss, Swiss Office of Swiss Palestine Office of the Jewish Agency, and he has written in German that he is candidate for immigration to Palestine, he and all his family.
So, Yehuda, this piece of paper saved your family.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the handwriting of the Polish Major Schallendijk or something like that. In Dutch, that Van Dijk family, this candidate for immigration and transport to a concentration camp is postponed for 4 weeks.
Okay.
Dit is our little house, our small house. Dit is the road. You see here there are adjacent houses, but not really next to our house, and with 2 canals. And here the little wooden bridge, like everywhere. It's called the Holy Weg, the Holy Road. In my in my eyes, there were tremendous high trees. There were high trees, but not special. They were all willows. That's very frequent in Holland. And this is the house. Here Giel Vergrey are standing before. They were already older, and he was a very he cultivated a very nice garden with flowers and fruit, the cherries or something like that.
It's a pity that it doesn't exist anymore. The house doesn't exist anymore.
No, that doesn't. And yeah. So this was the 4th floor, the front room. Here was the back room, and here was the closed veranda. And here behind there was an orchard. The trees of cherries or something like that. Okay, this is Giel. He was a very tall man with he was ginger with a big red moustache. In the front door there was a nice photo of him when he was in military service. He was riding on a horse, very impressive. And this, they were both them, I think it was when they were married 40 or 50 years, perhaps even 4 or 50 years. This is Giel, and this is Grey, typical Dutch people, not fat, long, and with nice kid. This is the medal he got from the Pope. These are this photo is taken, or this the only photo was taken during the war or immediately after the war. In the center is Grey Ruigrok. Here on the left is Dr. Hausdorff. Here, if I'm not mistaken, he had a cigar, so I guess it was after the war. Very quick, very soon afterward, Mrs. Hilde Hausdorff. There are 3 children, Bernard, Dov, Lily, and Ernst Ascher. And this is my father, Leon Van Dijk, my mother, Betty Van Dijk, and this is this is me. We were then 5, or Lily was 6 or 7. We were 5 or 4, 5 or 6. This is the same. Okay, this is the same photo. This is Boyka. She was then already between 18 and 20. Dr. Hausdorff, Hilde Hausdorff, Boyka, my mother, my father, Ascher, Dov, Ernst, Bernard, me, and Lily.
Did you stay in touch with Boyka?
Pardon?
Were you in touch with her? With the
yeah, Lily is one moment zeggen. Lily is very old. Oh God. One moment. Moet back. Yeah. Lily is not in a good health. She was married in England. She has many children. And with Ascher and Dov, not only we learned together in the yeshiva until they made their aliyah. We were always good friends. And even today we are regular. Dov and me, we are regular. And Ascher passed away a few years ago, sadly, and Dov and I in contact many times.
Where is Dov living?
In Bnei Brak. Ascher was director of a filial of the Bank Leumi, and after his pension in Haifa, after pension he moved to Bnei Brak. Dov learned Dov studied economics at second degree in economics and worked here in Israel. Lily was a social worker and I am a physician. This is the Ruigrok family. When they got they both got the medal from the Pope. Both have the medal, and those 2 ladies are sisters of Grey. And this is my father, Leon Van Dijk, my mother Betty Van Dijk, Lily Hausdorff. Shortly afterwards she married. This is Mrs. Hilde Van Dijk. This I started my. It was taken at 57, I think. Start my study. Dr. David Hausdorff. By the way, the priest who gave the medal. The next Sunday, he preached to his community, who told them that we Catholics, we have to learn from the Jews, because I was in some ceremony, and there was a Jewish boy of 18, and he put on his yarmulke. He was not ashamed. Hallelujah, that all the Catholic boys would be like this. Okay, here we are planting a tree in Yad Vashem. This is Dr. Hauser is standing. Difficult to say. Dit I am in black beard. Dit is Ghana Hausdorff and his daughter, who was born after the war. This is my second son. Today he is Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshivat HaItamar in Shomron. Many years he was Rav also of Yeshuv Ramat Makshimim in the Golan Heights. This is my brother. I think this is my brother David. I don't recognize all the people here. Maybe the quality is not too good. This is my mother, and it's also bad quality. When Gray got the certificate from the representative of the Israeli embassy, she is talking with my mother. That is Gerrit Don and Willy Don, who are getting their certificate from the representative of the Israeli embassy. Of course, all the tall Dutch people, and this in order to demonstrate what all those currently people did. This is our family, only the family of my wife, is all our siblings. It's not updated, it is 2 years ago. In the meantime, several, at least 4 or 5 grandchildren were born, and the granddaughters were married. So that's the only but I didn't have an updated group photo, family photo. But I think it is impressive.
It's incredible, and it should just grow and grow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yehuda, באמת תודה רבה.